As to the rest of the news, on Monday, the Janet Yellen era at the Federal Reserve officially began. Yellen has a difficult task ahead of her. Late last year, her predecessor at the nation's central bank, Ben Bernanke, announced that the Fed would soon begin drawing down its multi-billion-dollar bond buying program, more commonly known as quantitative easing. That drawdown started during the final months of Bernanke's tenure, but Yellen will be responsible for most of it. Her job will involve more than just fiscal policy, however. At the same time as she manages the Fed's drawdown, Yellen will also have to convince the world's leaders that the global economy can survive without easy American money. Sounds dramatic, but Janet Yellen really does hold the future of global capitalism in her hands, or at least to some extent. After all, it was only 5 years ago that the global economy entered its worst downturn since the Great Depression. Things have no doubt improved since the day Lehman Brothers went under, but the markets are still fragile and are arguably one currency devaluation or one debt crisis away from another crash. So can Yellen help guide the U.S. through the stormy seas ahead? There's a time to radically rethink our economic course. Joining me now from our New York studios for more on this is Richard Wolff, Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and author of numerous books, including his latest, Democracy at Work. Richard Wolff. Dr. Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom.
Professor Wolff. Richard, you actually went to grad school, econ grad school, Yale, at the same time as Janet Yellen. I don't know if you knew her, but what do you think of her? Is she the right person for the job?
Well, she's the kind of person that has been groomed most of her adult life for this kind of work, literally up through the ranks of the academic world, the policy world, vice chair under Ben Bernanke. So she's in every way the appropriate person to continue. If we think that the crisis of the last few years, the worst and deepest since the Great Depression, is a time to rethink policy, to face the failures of policy in the past, then she's not the right person, because nothing in her background or in her writing would predispose anyone to expect anything much different from her compared to what her predecessors did.
From the time of the Great Depression until the Reagan era, we didn't really see any banking crises, and then the Reagan era banking crisis, of course, was after '83 when Reagan deregulated the S&Ls. In '86 they fell apart, if I'm remembering my timeline right, and he then threw some banksters, S&L banksters, in jail. Our federal our major banking system, though, was largely deregulated around '99 and 2000, and it's still that way. I mean, we've got 5 or 6 banks now that control an amount of money equal to about 65% of GDP. Aren't we still on the edge of something like what happened in 2008 or 1929?
Absolutely, and there is no reason why any level-headed person wouldn't want to say, my goodness, we deregulated in the end of the 1990s. President Clinton signed the bill that canceled the old Glass-Steagall Act that had provided some buffer, and literally 7 years later, the economy falls apart, led by the banks making dangerous loans with other people's money, risky loans that they didn't understand, that blew up on them, proving once again that leaving the important matter of credit in an economy becoming more and more dependent on credit in a handful of big banks is a fundamentally unwise way to organize a modern economy.
In your newest article, you argue that here in the United States, the two parties are better understood as two wings of one capitalist party in the U.S., sharing virtually dictatorial political influence. To what extent do you think that's the result of capitalism or markets or even Fed policy versus the U.S. Supreme Court discovering in the 38 years ago in the Buckley case and 36 years ago in the First National Bank case that money is protected by the First Amendment and corporations are protected by the 14th Amendment, and we fought the Civil War to free the corporations?
Well, I think the basic issue is this. And there's a recent book you might want to take a look at by a man named Thomas Piketty, just Thomas Piketty, just published now, Harvard University Press, Capital in the 21st Century. What Piketty does, which deals with your question, is show that capitalism, and this has been true for several centuries now, systematically produces growing inequality of wealth and income. So grievously does this work that periodically there's a political upsurge of the people hurt by this, the masses who are falling further and further behind, and they change it like we did in this country in the 1930s. They stop that process. They give us more equality and less inequality. But of course, the people at the top, those who benefit from capitalism's tendency to inequality, learn that lesson too. And the lesson they learned is you've got to stop the capacity for the mass of people to use politics to undo the inequality of capitalism. And I think the last 30 or 40 years, all the way up to Citizens United and all the other decisions, have been the process of the biggest, richest, and the biggest corporations to make sure that politics can't play the role that Piketty shows it periodically did in the past, that now they will control the politics with money, and so we'll have to let capitalism implode on itself because it cannot be stopped politically from the inequality that in the end will swallow it up.
Is Piketty's book the one that was first published in French?
Yes.
Yeah.
Piketty and Saez, you may know, are the leading authorities around the world in inequality of wealth and income.
How is that analysis different from Marx's analysis in Das Kapital?
I think the difference is Marx always integrated politics and economics. He didn't like the idea, and he would have made fun of the notion of a politics department or a political science department over here and an economics department. For him, these were intertwined realities. And the difference between him and Piketty would be he wants to show that the economics shapes the politics, not that the politics periodically comes in and undoes an economic reality, that the two are interwoven. And it's particularly important now because of the clear thrust of big corporations and the top 1% to control politics, to prevent it from undoing, in the name of democracy and the mass of the people, what the economy is doing to the mass of the people, namely pushing them further and further to the bottom, eliminating the middle class and all the rest of it.
So if capitalism is basically going to crash, should the neo-Keynesians, the modern Keynesians, stop trying to fix it, stop trying to regulate it back to the New Deal, and just stand back and let it happen?
Well, they're being defeated at every turn. They're frustrated, they're pushing. I understand their frustration. I think they're facing the fact that they don't have the base. They can be all the Keynesians or neo-Keynesians or post-Keynesians they want. They don't have the CIO, the socialist and communist movements of the 1930s that translated their critique into a political force. They would have to go back and recognize the need to build a unified political force at the bottom, something they've never done, in order to see a chance for their ideas to make a difference. You know, here's an ironic truth. The Soviet Union didn't collapse because of an external attack. The United States, likewise, is not going to go down because someone is going to blow us up with toothpaste explosives. The problem of the United States is it's imploding because it can't solve the problem of taking care of the mass of the people with a capitalist system that is only interested in wealth accumulating in a tiny minority. That contradiction Marx pointed out, and that's never been addressed in this system, and it's coming to a crisis point.
Well, it's an extraordinary analysis and a concerning one. In the Professor Richard Wolff, thanks so much for being with us tonight.